our last paper, our closing keynote. It's my pleasure to introduce my dear and old friend, John Erni. John is, all his credentials are here, and a lot more as well. John is Fung Endowed Chair of Humanics and professor in the Department of Humanities and Creative Writing at Hong Kong Baptist University. And for the last 6 weeks, 7 weeks, or the last two months or so, he was also here in the Department of CNM as the William Lim Siu Wai visiting professor in the Cultural Studies in Asia PhD program. So he left that after he finished teaching 10 days ago, went back to Hong Kong, and he flew back last night to come to do this. So please join me to welcome John.
Thank you so much, Audrey. Is this on? No? There. Indeed, this feels like coming home. I've been telling people, all my friends back home. Last night when I arrived, I felt like I was coming home. Such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me here to be part of this conversation. As Audrey said at the very beginning of today's event, that this particular symposium might serve as a kind of springboard for the research collaboration group that Frank Martin, myself, and Audrey were the key architects of this kind of collaborative project to move on perhaps to the next phase. And so the question about digital citizenship might be one of the kind of points of our common focus. So for that, not only do I thank Audrey for having me here, but also to thank Frank Martin as well, who is the principal investigator of the Melbourne-based grant that brought me here today. So I'm looking at the watch, and it's past 4:30. You're still here. We're talking about digital life. So at some point, we got to talk about sex. Otherwise, you're all going to fall asleep, right? This project was somewhat special to me. Those of you who know my work, I've been looking at youth culture studies for many, many years. But most of what I write about, not just that, but also much of my writing, even though some of the writing or research is about Hong Kong, tends to have a more kind of international, outward-looking kind of orientation. This project turns out to be deeply local, almost frighteningly colloquial, which also is a bit of a challenge for me to engage in. And that was actually the motivation for doing it, because I'm trying to look at a phenomenon that has been so pervasive. How pervasive? We don't have a scientific measurement of that, but guys in Hong Kong engaging in chat room culture, talking about sex. Not just Hong Kong, but globally speaking. How pervasive it is, I think all of us have a kind of sense in our mind, without having to actually measure it, because you can't measure this sort of thing, right? Now, women too, right? Don't get me wrong, I always correct some of my friends who say that, of course, this is just guy stuff, right? Of course it is. It's predominantly speaking about a certain construction or new construction of masculinity in the digital age. But why would that leave out women who are actually also active users on the internet, looking at sex, talking about sex with each other, and a number of other activities that take place around sort of the erotic imagination? Now, this particular project does focus on the segment of the internet culture, chat culture, in which men were predominantly the users. Okay. The subtitle of this is that it's concerning a particular chat room. I'm not even sure you call it a chat room, because it's really, like Hedy is from Hong Kong. Is there anybody else from Hong Kong other than Hedy and I? Okay. Now, the Golden Forum is much, much bigger than a chat room. It's a forum that contains many different threads of conversations and topics, and it is such a huge phenomenon. If you are into chatting in the Hong Kong context, and you're not doing it on the Golden Forum, there is something very wrong with you. This is very pervasive. So that caught my attention, particularly something that also caught my attention that really launched this particular project for me personally was this movie in 2012 called Due West. In Cantonese, colloquial Cantonese, the word West kind of rhymes with or is very much associated with the female sex organ. So Due West, yeah, you get the point. Now, I'm going to show you just a trailer of this movie, but before that, just the context. This movie was adopted from a novella that Golden Forum boys were writing and became such a huge popular phenomenon, collective writing of a particular kind of erotic sex quest story. Very adolescent, very immature, right? But it's really talking about going for the experience of prostitution in the north, that is to say in China, going up north to go for kind of sex, prostitution. But the essence of it, like I said, is that it emerged from a highly collective project, right? On the Golden Forum, through chatting, through bouncing ideas with each other, teasing each other, based on some real life prostitution of getting prostitution services, in order to form this novella to a point that it got so much visibility that someone decided to invest money in making this B movie. Okay, it's just a B movie. It's a comedy, very superficial. There's not one critic on earth that likes this movie. Okay, so just to preface it before you see it, this particular trailer is only a minute long. It has a couple of very quick flashes of pornographic images, just to warn you. Okay.
45蚊。
有人話，不上去桑拿中心玩，會令到一個人響打一兩次冷震之間，將建立咗20幾年嘅價值觀全面崩潰。
見到間唔好，老細，開得嚟玩，可以加價咁多㗎啦，尤其喺呢度。
我叫小雨啊，一前頭嗰啲咧。
咁大個人仲叫小魚，其實都幾撚白痴㗎喎。
淡定啲，我信你喎，俾啲耐性啊！
先生，你不舒服吗？需要帮忙嗎？
可以了，謝謝。只是有點想㗎。估唔到邪瓜都有啲咁清麗脫俗嘅女。哇！你睇下個樣，簡直係完全食人間煙火嗰隻。
佢唔食人間煙火，唔通食你條蕉咩？戇鳩！
Some of you are laughing at the language as well. If you did recognize some of the, what locally we call it foul language, that is to say impolite Cantonese, which is also very much the...
Còn thấy con trai ta đâu không?
happens all the
Có thấy
time.
con trai ta đâu không? Hình như là giọng của lão độc vật.
Sorry, I just...
Có thấy con trai của ta không? Không thấy, không thấy. Con trai.
Which one? Huh? Oh, are we on Chrome? Oh, we're on Chrome, that's why. Alright, we're on Chrome. That's your default, okay, there we go. And I come back here. Okay. 2 quick points to make about this movie. This is a phenomenon that obviously crosses genre and crosses cultural spheres. And crudely put, it crossing from a kind of very underground subcultural cultural sphere to something that is out in the open, sort of above, as it were. Signaling, of course, that there is something of a murky border between these two kinds of spheres. The second point I want to make is the very content, the textuality of this movie actually emerged from a profoundly local collective ethnography, right? So this is one way to show a ethnographic result of a project or something in the form of a movie, because a lot of what you see in that movie actually are based on or allegedly based on real life experiences of the Golden Forum boys. In Hong Kong, the discussion of youth internet chatting is largely framed as part and parcel of the broader emergence of internet idling culture. Surprisingly, though, there have been few news report or investigative analysis on the internet chatting culture in Hong Kong. When the reporting does appear, most of them focus on internet crime, slander, and sexual harassment. In other words, local news rarely provide in-depth insights into the activities conducted in the chat room. So I think that actually captured my attention. Something that is so pervasive, but yet we know very little about. To the point in which, you know, I can almost do this in Hong Kong. Like every guy whom I meet, regardless of age, regardless of profession, you could be a lawyer, right? You could be a professor, right? At some point, 2 a.m. at night, you get on the internet, you were one of the Golden Forum boys, right? It's that kind of pervasiveness. Of course, that already suggests there's something very interesting in terms of the kind of front stage, backstage. Who was it? Government. Right. Oh, got it. Okay. Right. Thank you. Now, my main goal in this talk is to provide a discussion to problematize the sexual discourse in this fairly vast segment, however somewhat underground segment of Hong Kong society, with regard to questions of gender, misogyny, and sexual freedom. I want to use internet sex chat culture as a springboard for theorizing the conception of contemporary sexual values through an ethnographic analysis of sex chatting. So I did my own ethnographic work in this project. I'll come to that in a moment. Now, internet-based sex chat, brief definition. It refers to the casual exchange of vernacular views about sexual beliefs, rumors, and behavior, conducted either synchronously or asynchronously within a monitored or unmonitored environment. The chatting can arise from any initiation made by the chatters themselves, or it can be driven by social controversies and moral panic about sex. The chatting often involves written text and visual icons that are generated by the users, often forming its own universe of linguistic and visual slangs, metaphors, tones, and registers. As I said, little is known about the sexual values that mediate sex chat, nor the particularities of the chat space, the nature of the modes of masculinity constructed through the chatting practice, or the broader social milieu out of which the sex chat discourse emerges. A theorization of the conception of sexual values through investigating internet sex chatting, I think, is rather necessary because it can provide a response to the rapidly changing forms, norms, and values of sex as a result of the digitalization of everyday life. And yet this digitalization of virtually all walks of life, especially in human communication, is itself the result of the changing contour of the consumer society that emphasizes creativity, social efficiency, instant gratification, and so on. At the same time, this digital life, as well as the consumerist ideology that underlines it, have not gone unnoticed by the regulators of culture. The intense social and legal scrutiny of the dynamic space where sex and the internet mix is by now rather commonplace. This project grounds the theoretical examination of all that I just told you in a detailed empirical study of the Hong Kong Golden Forum. The Hong Kong Golden Forum was ranked a top site in Hong Kong by Alexa in 2009. This is an organization that looks at number of factors and criteria. This, of course, had very high traffic. It is a chat site well known to be visited mainly by male youth and of course older adults. I will also, in this project, I also made reference to other popular forums such as the Hong Kong Discussion Forum and Three Boys, Two Girls. I will forego the distinction for now. If you're interested, later on I'll tell you the differences among them. But these are some of the most popular chat sites, chat forums in which sex discussion online would take place in Hong Kong. As I tried to indicate earlier, female participation in this space is another kind of phenomenon that we also know very little about. Now, that is not to say, however, that those who pose with a male name or speak like a guy, for example, may have been women, okay, or girls anyway. So I think that we will, sometimes it's very hard to find out the real truth, as it were. But indeed, research in sociology, social psychology, communication tell us that social chatting about space tends to be an informal social practice pursued mainly by men. At least the gender of the chatter is at least self-identified as such. Critical popular culture studies regards this lack of formality as socially significant because it affords the particular practice of sex chat in the first place while actually constituting the very cultural character of the content of the chatting. Meanwhile, gender studies regards the maleness of sex chatting as something originating from a very general cultural permissiveness that often positions men to be more outspoken than women in the public pursuit of explicit sexual conversation. At any rate, the chat room or forum where sex chatting takes place is a predominantly male space. To be more precise, it is a space for the ongoing construction of particular modes of masculinity. Golden Forum was launched in the year 2000. It started out as a place in which sort of geeky guys talk about and exchange information on computer technology, where you get parts and build your computer, fixing computer, that sort of thing. The word golden actually was drawn from a particular site in a very local area of Hong Kong, and that site is called the Golden Computer Center. So if you are interested in this project and to know more about it, and do come to Hong Kong, I'll take you through the Golden Computer Center because that provides you with some very raw kind of material milieu that through which you can understand where these guys come from and how they interact with each other. It all started in that computer shopping center, and so much so that they actually built a website on it using the same name. Okay, let me go through this 6 million. So rather, a huge number of people got an award, social network, all that. Right? Now, I will gloss this over very quickly. Okay, if there is any writing, popular or scholastically about the Golden Forum or this phenomenon in Hong Kong, all of them, I'm telling you, all of them will talk about the Golden Forum as a site for political organizing. Popular, vernacular, resistive political kind of speech and chatting, and a lot of second-hand creativity to oppose the government and all of that. So needless to say, the Golden Forum played a crucial role during the umbrella movement of Hong Kong. But even before, and of course certainly continuing after that, a great deal of political energy, resisting energy among young people who are so disillusioned and angry about this government, and of course about the bigger government behind it, as it were. But I just want to kind of mark this in your mind that scholars have largely talked about the Golden Forum as what is called, quote, a subaltern public sphere, or in another work, call it the crisis media performance during the umbrella movement, or another work by a friend, Rolene, called Politics by Other Means. She calls it post-digital gameplay. Post-digital gameplay as a kind of rubric or framework through which the particular kind of resistant politics get organized in discursive ways in Hong Kong. Another kind of scholar or researcher called it the gift economy, right? That is to say, this is one place in which people actually can experience creativity and freedom in a very stifling political atmosphere in Hong Kong. Okay. But that constitutes a great deal of the space of the Golden Forum. But that other space about sex isn't small either. Okay. Now, I leave it up to your imagination how sex and politics mix or intermix to form a particular kind of popular culture that is rather important. If you want to understand how popular life, popular sentiment, popular affect, and that sort of thing is conducted and organized in Hong Kong, I would really invite you to look at Golden Forum, right? Because of the diabolical mix between sex and politics, as it were. But I'm bracketing that part. I'm only looking at this part with you this afternoon. Now, so it's organized around channels. There are different channels. There's one particular channel in which all of the people around 2 a.m. or so start to gather around. It's like a town hall, right? It has an innocuous name called Love and Sex. And if you go into it, you see the actual threads, and then you'll break it down into different kinds of topics that they talk about. These are all in Chinese, of course, and that's just the English translation. Just to give you a sense about the physical appearance, if you will, of the chat room. Okay. Now, what I'm interested in finding out in this project, a few things I want to look at. Mainly, what are the recurring themes in the sex chatting, the specificities of the language used by the chatters, including written and visual slangs that seek to reconstitute the meaning of sex. I also, through looking at these things, I examine how they may be contributing to the emergence of what I call vernacular masculine culture specific to Hong Kong and unique to its digital chatting culture. I want to define this particular term in this way, that nothing is very blank. It's a casual lad culture characterized by continuing curiosity toward all things bodily and sexual. This is non-contemplative, unrefined sensibility, but yet bring with it a social cool, built not on class distinctions or educational attainment, but on street knowledge and popular tastes. It works like this particular mode of masculinity works like a colloquial language because it speaks the idiom of the curious, the obscene, and even the vulgar. Now, there was a question earlier in the last session about methodological questions about how to conduct research on the internet when people are online. So what happens if you take them out of that particular milieu and do offline work with them in focus groups and whatnot. Now, in this particular project, I did both. And I could not share with you, I don't have time to share with you the challenges we had in doing what is called ethnographic ethnographic work. Right? Now, so we adopt ethnographic methods, qualitative study, right? I hired 6 university male research helpers. They need to be in their 20s. I was very convinced. I'm too old to be authentic in that space. So I hired 6 guys who, of course, upon interviewing them, told me how many hours they actually spent on Golden Forum, which of course, needless to say, outweigh all the hours that they needed to do for their studying and eating and sleeping, all the rest of it, right? So these are die-hard Golden Forum boys whom I hired. And I trained them to perform participant observation on the Golden Forum site. The period of observation and participating in the chatting lasted for 6 months. I asked them to put in an average amount of about 10 hours per week in engaging in the chat sites. I asked them to play multiple roles. Some of them can just initiate a new thread of conversation. Others just jump into other threads that have been developing. After all that stuff, we managed to get about 12 guys from the Golden Forum who actually appeared in physical form to come and do 2 focus groups with us. I consider that a huge success to get 12, right? Even though we're talking millions of users and all of that. But for them to emerge from the underground, as it were, right, it was very, very difficult. And of course, I was very grateful for that. Now, traditional ethnographic studies are firmly situated in the offline social world, yet ethnography has become an increasingly influential qualitative research methodology that adopts ethnographic research techniques to study cultures and communities that emerge from CMC, right? It draws on the tools adopted in cultural studies in conducting ethnography, but with a very, very keen commitment to what Paula Salko calls the practice of cultural analysis, quote, to be truer to lived realities of people. Just one aspect I want to share with you about getting access to and maintaining a co-presence, in the chat site as researchers. Maybe I just won't do that. I just want to throw out a particular concept called not participant observation so much, but participant experiencing. This is Wallstrom, who defined the participant experiencer as someone who entails the role of active contributor to the group being studied. This role specifically refers to the researcher who has personal experience with the central problem being discussed by group participants. Now, this means an active and ongoing reading and posting of messages to the group after making an initial effort known as lurking. So when I say 6 months that I put these guys through in the research process, the first couple of months they were just lurkers. Now this, for those of you who are keen on research ethics, flag, right? That's unethical, right? In traditional understanding in terms of ethics of research. I can point you to a couple of sources in which there was consensus among people who do net ethnography to approve lurking as an ethical practice. Right? If you want to talk about that, I can talk with you about it. We did overcome some of that. I need to write my ethics clearance, right, for this project. It was funded anyway. I will skip the part here on the kind of a bit of a review on how feminist research, feminist theory, as well as queer theory, in terms of their views on sex on the internet. I think many of you are very familiar with that, so I won't go through that very much. And jump right into some of what we found. Okay. Many of the visual icons seen in the chat threads are a direct substitution for a certain commonly used expression in Cantonese, or even just common expression, such as the inputting of this, the one with the two fingers, the middle, like that, right? You see that guy over there? Okay. So that, of course, means FU, or that's easily recognizable. The one above that dude, the dude that bounces around, okay? You know what that means? Well, yes, sure. But you're not guy enough, by the way, just from that response. It signals the bouncy female breast, okay? So if you want to talk about that particular body part, you don't type it, right? You just kind of use that, put that icon. I'm telling you, these are their invention. They didn't adopt it from some other people's work. The Golden Forum boys invented these icons. Now, not all the icons are crudely referential, though. Some of them express hidden meanings and are distinctive to the culture of Golden Forum. One of the core icons of the forum is the icon of the clown god, right? This big dude over there. Its Chinese expression is Gao San, right? Gao San comprises two Chinese characters, Gao and San. Gao is the phonetic approximation to another popular term or slang in Cantonese referring to the male sexual organ. I won't say it in Cantonese, okay, because Hetty is here. Otherwise, I would have said that. Okay. It sounds like Gao, but not quite, right? And San means God, right? So Gao San is a playful linguistic construct to mean the god of the penis or the god of stupidity. So how is it used? The icon looks like the face of a clown, so it's frequently used as a shorthand to respond to something stupid or lame in the chatting. The icon has also been so much embraced by the Golden Forum boys that they will venerate it as God and recreate it on t-shirts, mugs, and other objects to be adorned among chatters for easy recognition in offline context. So you see it, we're brothers, as it were, right? With this particular icon. You saw this icon also put on the kind of more political resistance, right? You need a clown or the chief executive, right? Because our chief executive was actually stupid. So another visual icon that is unique to the Golden Forum is the hand-waving icon. Is it there? Yeah, it's at the bottom over there. So this icon has multiple meanings beyond a simple hello. It can signify agreement to or acknowledgement of a certain viewpoint in the chatting. It is also frequently used as a placeholder for something. That is to say, usually when you chat and you're talking to through different threads, and then you have something you want to say, but you want to hold on to it before you say something. So what you do is, and other people would recognize this, when you do this, it's not a bye-bye, it's like, yeah, hold it, I'll come back to you, right? Maybe tonight, maybe 5 nights later, who knows, right? But hold it. So that's one other function to it. It's called name leaving, 留名. That's the function of it. Now in this case, it's also used, but there's a final usage for this particular one, this hand waving. It is allegedly a criminal offense in Hong Kong to directly post nude photos, pornographic materials in public forums, especially those that reveal private body parts. So if some guys did it, other chatters would like to share these materials. But when they were sharing it, they also post this as a threat to the original poster of this, to say, I'm gonna call the police. The police will come get you. Of course they never do, right? So I want to suggest that there's a whole lot of what we found out in this particular space that has to do with just teasing, mocking, male bravado, to say, if you do something stupid, something lame, or something that is illegal, we're going to catch you. But of course they never did. And it's one way for them to relate to each other, as it were, right? Now, alongside these sorts of inventive use of visual icons, Golden Forum chatters also adopt their own set of idioms. Generally, these idioms can be distinguished into 2 groups. One group draws from original Cantonese phrases. Sometimes they make innovative changes to them, either phonetically or semantically. And the other group are phrases that are crystallized from layers and layers of sequences of developmental chats within the space over a long time. Let me give you one example. Take the term J as an example. Does it ring a bell at all to any of you? Okay, you're clearly not from Hong Kong. Okay, and everyone in Hong Kong would know this, regardless of age, by the way. Okay. It is not only the most often used term within the forum, it's frequently a term used in combination with other words to form phrases for easy codification of meanings. The original meaning of J refers to male masturbation. It comes from another frequently used Cantonese slang to depict male masturbation, which is 打飛機, right? Or 打 JJ. Now, Taiwanese would probably recognize JJ as a kind of substitution phrase for that. So from J, which refers to that particular favorite pastime, arises a whole range of related terms, such as J-ing, J-I-N-G. If you type that, that means we know what you're doing, right? You're chatting, but you're also J-ing at the same time, right? J-photo, which means, I'm asking for J-photo, I'm not asking for your face, right? Who cares about your face, right? Or where you travel to in Tokyo, right? I want a J-photo, right? I need a J-post. There are others I won't say here. Other things they do with J, right? So the term J and its associated phrases proliferated not only on Golden Forum, became widely accepted and used in the other forums such as Hong Kong Discussed and 3 Boys 2 Girls as well. It's not even embarrassing, it's just matter of fact to them, right? This particular usage. My own favorite is whenever they post like a picture of a favorite celebrity, male or female, whom they love and adore and all that, they would enter JED. Right? Done, that is to say, right? When looking at it, done, jade, right? So a conversation in a discussion forum can be structured by a combination of many of these creative elements. This is one particular linguistic artifact. The next example I'm going to show you is that they string together a number of these linguistic artifacts, including words as well as icons. This particular one, in Chinese of course, reads 報警向左向右走召喚. And then you have these two dudes with their beards, right, and all that. Now, the English literal translation of this is this one, right? Call the police to the left, to the right, summon or summoning, right? So let me break it down for you, okay? I don't have time. To call the police, just the first part about calling the police, right? Now, of course, I already told you there is a lot of bragging going on there, in which whenever somebody brags about something against the law, such as, they always brag about having sexual intercourse with underage girls. Right? This is the top #1 thing they brag about, whether it's true or not, right? And when somebody puts in something like this, other chapters would mock and frighten the offender by referring him to the police. So that's that part. To the left, to the right, quickly, around 2003, long time ago, when the manager of Golden Forum noticed that there are a lot of this so-called foul, dirty language going on within Golden Forum, they decided to use a metric to substitute all the dirty words into something that looked more innocuous. So the word F, okay, which was typed at the time in 2003, the manager changed, whenever that was entered electronically into it, it will appear as something else. It appeared as to the left, to the right. And if you weren't around in 2003, it's like, what, right? And that was the original meaning. Yes, 5 minutes, thank you. I'm nowhere near. Never mind. I'm having so much fun here. Never mind. So you get the idea, right? So to the left, to the right actually means fuck or fucking, right? Okay. Summoning is another, kind of nerdy thing to say, because all these boys adore all these goddesses and beautiful women with magic powers, so you summon them, all that. So the sentence at the end of it, all taken together, reads something like, I'm going to call the police to report you the dickhead. Go figure. And then this icon is like, yeah, like a high five. Okay. Now, I'm sweating, right? And it took me like 15 minutes to go to work through this process. To them, it's like second nature, right? You type this up, and everybody looks at it, everybody gets it, and then move on to something else, right? Imagine a space that's filled with this type of linguistic inventions and creativity and whatnot. Okay. I'll skip another example. No time. But I have to do this last one before I conclude. How's that? I still have 4 minutes, right? Okay. Now, one of the most popular issues in Golden Forum had to do with the fondness for sharing real-life experiences from visiting sex workers. In Hong Kong, the vernacular saying for visiting a sex worker is calling the chicken, right? 叫雞, right? This is typically an interesting interaction. There is typically an interesting interaction between those who are or who claim to be experienced in playing with the chicken, and those who are curious but claim to have never had such an experience. Right? You can spend hours just putting these people together. One side they say, I have so much experience. I know how to do it. I know left and right, top, bottom, all this, everything. And I know all the right places to go. I know all the prices. I know all the women that I can describe to you that I've been with. And then another set of guys who claim to be innocent, right? They're all claiming one way or the other. And then they engage in that chat, right? Now, the one thing that eventually took place on Golden Forum is that they began filing what they call reports, okay? As in, your term paper. Like you've gone through this and then you summarize your book. It's a report of someone who had gone to see a sex worker, had an experience, and the reports would contain detailed description of the whole occurrence of the incident, from the place of the brothel, the description of the female sex worker, and the whole process. Sometimes these reports are presented as novellas, in which the webmaster would even add additional details into the whole story. They co-construct this story. So the most famous one, as I indicated earlier, original name was called Epic Chicken Calling Report from Dongguan Woods, right? Which eventually was changed into Due West. This particular novella was divided into chapters, but only a part of the story was posted until enough chapters had gained an interest and made inquiries for further exposure of the rest of the story. Conclude. An overall liberal attitude can be found in the social construction of youth sexuality in Hong Kong. By that, I mean a society that wants to proffer an attitude toward responsible sexuality, learned, of course, through scientific knowledge about one's body, a trust-based social interaction between the sexes, and an effort to resist the presumed sexual excesses of the West. It is a discourse of measured liberalism. Skipping all this, yes. It's a discourse of measured liberalism fit for a self-perceived hybrid society, infused with liberal democratic values, cradled in a family-oriented traditionalist cultural and ideological context. Now, what I want to indicate is that I can fairly confidently say this, that in the last 4 decades in Hong Kong, we witnessed a series of qualitative shifts in the discursive construction of youth and sexuality in Hong Kong. And I'll summarize the shifts in these ways. There had been a shift of discourse framework from we used to talk using the language delinquency and deviance to the talk about sexual ignorance. They used to be delinquent, now they just don't know the danger, the risks, the unethical, the immoral, whatever aspect of sex. The other shift in sex education focus, of course, in conjunction with the first shift, was not only to introduce sexual knowledge, but also to teach them about sexual ethics. And then the third one, in terms of intervention, we used to have family planning as the major sort of framework, policy framework to deal with youth sex, to more modern concerns over individual rights and responsibility. While youth sexuality is never a moral panic in Hong Kong, I cannot remember an incident in which it rose to the level of a moral panic in which church groups, religious education, parents all came around, even though all of this has been going on underground, as it were. Even though it's never a moral panic in Hong Kong, it's nonetheless a key site of wide cultural debate. At the core of the debate lies the problem of the liberal self. Thus, youth's continuing significance to the development of liberal capitalist social relations can be said to derive from the importance of sex. The heightened sensitivity given to youth sex suggests that it may be through the political importance attached to sex that this thing called youth reappears as a discrete and distinctive social category. It may be the case that criteria of sex provide the means through which the state reaches deep into the lives of young people in order to organize them into newly coherent social category. However, as this study or similar kind of studies would suggest, how do youth themselves construct their own sexual selves under the liberal capitalist state, literally underneath their noses, as it were? You will recall that the aim of this Golden Forum study is to try to reframe our theoretical understanding of sexual values, shaped now by a profoundly quotidian source of meaning making, completely street level stuff. It is suggested here that the practice of sex chat among men and teenage boys who have been variously labeled in the popular imagination as poisonous males, geeky boys, or lonely boys, by looking at the sex chat space or conduct, it offers a window into the changing gender culture in Hong Kong. The increasingly varied internet experiences are remaking our sexual discourse. Ultimately, the notion of vernacular masculine culture, I hope, can open up a way for us to look at certain phenomena and objects and conduct that moves in and out of our popular sort of visibility level, visibility line, right? As I tried to indicate in the very beginning, right? Some of the men or young men whom you meet in Hong Kong you would probably not ever imagine that they would be one of these Golden Forum boys talking about this sort of thing in that sort of way at a certain time of the day, right? But they are. But at the same time, they don't look that way, okay? And then they're building another kind of subculture, even sort of a sense of political solidarity against the mainstream culture in that way. Let me just finish by posing 3 key questions, just for thought, for thinking, okay? I'm interested in asking, how does the phenomenon of vernacular masculinity raise important questions about the cultural contestation that takes place at the intersection of the sex-tech regulation matrix, arising from the general discourse of the liberal but discredited self? You know what I mean? Liberal, young people have been put in the liberal framework, but as a discredited subject, or discredited subjects in that kind of society. So how does this type of vernacular masculinity, crude as it may be, right, raise important questions about certain contestation going on? A more fundamental question. Is the space of sex text, sex/text, that is the writing of sex into everyday space of banality, how does that a cultural space outside of the disciplinary apparatus? Is it a counter-public, which there's plenty of theory to use, or is it a field of self-taught, unorganized sex education in a place in which there isn't any organized formal sex education offered to young people? And finally, if that is the case, that is all the counter-cultural energy, how does that square with rampant misogyny? And of course, there's enough homophobia, transphobia going on in that space as well. But I want to just maybe one brief remark about that kind of thing. If you start to think in identity ways, in identity politics around LGBT or women and that sort of thing, your thinking pattern is drifting away, I guess, from what is really going on here. These are not built around identities. These are built around things that have no identity anchors. Right? These are just teasing bodily parts being, talked about in irresponsible ways, but yet forming this very powerful subculture in which they can relate to one another, as it were. So, but the net effect of it is still misogynistic. Don't get me wrong, right? It's still homophobic. One final question, and then a final thought. I guess I'm trying to think through this to see if there is a way in which we can look at the pull and push between, on the one hand, there are the urges for sexual exploration, especially online among young people. And on the other hand, the equally powerful pull for sexual self-restraint offline that is appearing normal, as it were. The pull and push between these two kinds of urges. Because of that, how is their interest in and fantasy about sex and affection dislocated? I think there might be some theoretical speculation that we could do here around youth sexuality that is seen as something not anchored, not identity-based, but in a permanent sequence of dislocation. As we look at especially the language that they invented. So much so that I want to maybe perhaps tentatively argue that the phenomenon of vernacular masculinity is a cultural manifestation of a dislocated sexuality in search of expression. Thank you very much.